Oh, it is so much worse than we thought. According to the results presentation delivered by SEGA literally today, they are looking at 14.3 billion yens in cost associated with structural reforms in the consumer area, mainly at European bases. Oh, well, what does that mean then? Well, as they define in the document, the consumer area refers quite specifically to video games. Stuff that have a, consumer base. Stuff that has customers. And what is the largest creator of video games under the SEGA brand in Europe? Well, that is, of course, the European company Creative Assembly, as HYENAS has left a far larger dent in the company than anyone had ever imagined. So, 14.3 billion yens in structural reform costs. Now, of course, not all of it is necessarily going to be Creative Assembly, but it is going to be the lion's share of the costs. And what is structural reform costs? Well, these are all the one-time costs when you are restructuring a company. That means first and foremost things like severance pay, for example, or paying off any penalties associated with contractual obligations. Say if you wanted to no longer lease a very large building that houses 800 odd people, for example, and go into a far smaller one. Just, again, for example. But primarily it is going to be severance pay. And 14.3 billion yen sounds like a ridiculous amount of money, and it is, but well, the yen is worth next to nothing. It's still a nice lump change, though. Nice little lump of change there, as it's damn near $100 million in restructuring charges. Oh boy. A lot of people. This isn't going to be a handful of people getting fired at Creative Assembly. This is probably going to be in the hundreds. The Creative Assembly, as we know today, is probably going to cease to exist after this. And they further elaborate on this as well here. So, structural reform in the consumer area. Profitability has been rapidly lowered due to a sudden change in the business environment surrounding the European customer base, sluggish sales, and increased costs. They also mention here, in addition to HYENAS cancels some unannounced title under development. So this pretty much is the confirmation that we've been looking for, that the other unannounced project at work at Creative Assembly are also Yito Cheeto. And this here. Profitability has rapidly lowered. See, this is the interesting part, because Total War Warhammer has never been more profitable. Well, it probably has. Total War Warhammer 2 was probably the height of profitability, but it is still churning out DLC. It is still churning out full-priced goddamn expansions. The Total War brand is still doing relatively okay, and this report is not taking into consideration Pharaoh, as that is still in the future for the next quarter. So this is preceding Pharaoh right here, but rapidly lower due to sudden changes in the business environment surrounding the European customer base. Misa thinking that SEGA, my original theory, that SEGA showed up at Creative Assembly, looked at HYENAS, looked at their project, and went, "You crazy gaijin motherfuckers, you're trying to ruin us," was perfectly correct. They've been looking at what Creative Assembly has been doing, wasting money and pissing off the customer base, and SEGA are very, very, very annoyed by this. As a result of reviewing the positions of this business based on the above situation, we determined that it is necessary to improve its earning structure by implementing structural reforms. In other words, cutting off a tremendous quantity of fat, as Creative Assembly has grown far larger than it has any hope whatsoever of actually sustaining. They also do go on to mention here, for CS Business in Europe, we see potential for regrowth from the perspective of owned IPs. Again, primarily that's going to be Total War. And development capabilities of specific genres, and we will improve our earning structure through structural reforms. What can they be? Focus on the strength of each studio and narrow down the lineup. Again, that is a direct reference to stop making woke shit and get back to making Total War, the cash cow that moves indefinitely. That's what they're saying right there. Review of fixed expenses levels in Europe sees business as a whole to an appropriate scale. Fixed expenses. These are going to be things like rent, of course. They're going to be things like electricity charges, fixed expenses. But again, primarily is going to be salaries. Yeah. And integration of European and US publishing functions. Improve cost structure by sharing marketing functions and strengthening development management and content checking functions. Now that's a little bit intriguing because that sounds like, to me, that they're actually looking at the US parts of SEGA and wondering if Europe has been given a little bit too much reins and that they're about to be put under foreign leadership, shall we say. And sales promotion through multi-platform and expansion of region rollout. That's just good old-fashioned increase in marketing. Challenge towards global mobile market through Rovio. So they're also making a merger with another company, so the mobile market is opening up. Now, I do believe they were moving over Company of Heroes games to mobile recently, and they're also moving over Total War games too. So they're probably going to keep expanding that, and hey, why not? Apparently, Feral Interactive did a fantastic job with porting Rome to mobile, so it sounded like a disaster to me, but hey, if it works, it works. But yeah, this all means, in essence, that Creative Assembly is going to probably get gutted. Now, okay, gutted might be too strong a term. Obviously, SEGA still realizes that the golden goose that is Total War is continuing to lay eggs. Otherwise, they wouldn't mention that they need to refocus themselves on their core business, which is going to be, unquestionably, Total War. But they are also making it very clear that Creative Assembly needs to stop with their random nonsense. No more middle management level development teams going, hey, wouldn't it be fun if we made a cross-dressing focused extraction shooter? No. Japan does not think that would be funny at all. Japan would like you to get back to making Total War titles because you've got plenty of them to make. This probably also means that, Sega Sophia, either Sega Sophia is going to see a increase in its import within the company due to the fact that they're the ones creating, just churning out stuff like DLC, etc., or Sega Sophia might simply just cease to exist as its title have not been particularly successful. Troy Total War, of course, was not a big success, and Pharaoh, though they are not taking Pharaoh into consideration yet, as that is in the next financial quarter again, is also likely to be an enormous disappointment, if not even an outright cost to the company, a cost that the company cannot handle right now. There is also the speculations as to, again, what happened to Three Kingdoms, because it seemed like Three Kingdoms was set up for Korean expansions. Now, my theory at the time was that they were simply going to just yeet the series, restart it, because they were going to align along the idea of selling full cost expansions for $60 in Total War 3 Kingdoms 2, which is the dumbest title ever. But it's also possible that this was a victim of HYENAS now, seeing as they are specifically saying that they need to focus on their strengths of each studio and narrow down the lineup. That makes me mayhaps think that they thought they could cut Three Kingdoms support in order to boost up HYENAS, which already at then must have been flagging heavily in terms of expense versus what they were actually likely to be getting out of it. We also know that CA has been doing various very, very dumb decisions, specifically to prop up HYENAS, so I don't know, it's a bit of a long shot, but I wouldn't consider it impossible by any stretch of the imagination. And it is going to, on the bright side, mean that we're going to see a lot more Total War games and a lot less resources spent on other nonsense. And on the one hand, I kind of sympathize with Creative Assembly as they were like, hey, let's try something different instead of just making the same thing. Well, turns out you don't actually have a talent for making anything but that thing, so get back to work, filthy gaijin. And on the other hand, it means we might actually finally see Medieval 3, hopefully in the new engine. Now, that is still probably like half a decade away because the engine development is going to take absolute ages, but on the other hand, Creative Assembly are hardly unknown for shipping stuff out the gate before it's even close to done, so let's shave off a good year. 4 years until we see Medieval 3 and its release in a completely unplayable, buggy to shit state. And then a further year until it's actually playable, so I suppose at the end of the day it amounts to much the same, but hey, details as long as we're paying for it. Sega doesn't really care when something is shipped, now do they? They are probably also going to take the focus away from the Saga-esque titles, which is exactly what Pharaoh was. Now, again, they're not taking Pharaoh into consideration just yet, but there is no way that sold well. I do not believe that for a single second. I do not envision that as even the faintest of possibilities, frankly. It is going to be a flop, and it's probably going to be the death knell of the idea of the sagas. If anything, they're going to refocus around DLC, and then put more money perhaps into Feral Interactive and farming out more of their older titles for mobile consumption. I think they were working on Medieval? I feel like I've heard they're working on a Medieval port. And hey, they could do all kinds of stuff with that. Re-release the Kingdom expansion, for example. Hell, maybe even begin extending offers to the modern teams. Could you imagine the mod between, well, you probably couldn't do that due to, IP laws, etc. But you could do a lot of, I was about to say, like, you could extend them to stuff like the Rings of Power. God damn, help me. Lord of the Rings. Rings of Power, shoot me now. Lord of the Rings mod. But, IP concerns. Then again, the Rings... Please shoot me. Put me out of my misery. The Lord of the Rings IP is currently hands of Embracer Group, which is kind of in dire need of money as well because of the enormous failure of Saints Row, and they're a far more reasonable customer than, well, the Tolkien estate, frankly. So, who knows? Now, that would be a potential enormous coup. I don't know about necessarily the legal ramifications around legalizing a mod like that necessarily, but it's just a wild idea there. And hey, an official Total War? The Lord of the Rings? That would sell like hotcakes. Good God help me, it would, wouldn't it? It would sell like absolutely mad. And again, Embracer Group, far more reasonable customers. And Creative Assembly is going to need to look towards the big seller if they want to keep being a company, because this is a warning shot. This is absolutely a warning shot. This is Sega saying, hey, okay, we know Total War is still valuable, we can still see the income from Total War Warhammer, but you need to shape up. We gave you rope, and you elected to hang yourself with it. You're not getting any more rope. And if, perchance, you elect to abuse the rope you've already been given yet further, well, we haven't pulled the trapdoor lever just yet, but we are preparing to. We'll see. This definitely puts Sega in an interesting position, and Creative Assembly in an even more interesting one, and potentially a fatal one too. We'll see, we'll see. Do let me know what you think in the comments section down below on all of this, of course, as always, and until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again soon. Have a good day.